Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to another episode of Rethink Culture, that podcast that shines the spotlight on leaders of businesses people love to work for. My name is Andres Constantinu. I'm your host, and I see myself as a micromanager turned servant leader who developed a passion for workplace culture. At Rethink Culture, we're on a mission to help 1 million companies create a healthier, more fulfilling culture at work. And our latest project is the Culture Health Score, an online service that lets you build a high-performance culture. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Shivani Gupta, all the way from Brisbane, Australia. She is an engineer turned entrepreneur turned educator, TEDx speaker, best-selling author, and mentor for female entrepreneurs and leaders. She's presented to over 250,000 people in 19 countries, worked with 1,500 leaders, and authored 8 books. She's a serial entrepreneur, has scaled many of her businesses over 1 million USD, and exited a business that she grew to 5 million. She's a mom, wife, philanthropist, meditator. She meditates a lot, and she loves an excellent coffee and chai. And one of her passions is to educate 1 million girls in third world countries. So very welcome to the Rethink Culture podcast, Shivani.
Thank you so much, Andres, and thank you for that beautiful intro.
So tell us a little bit about your work. So you're a speaker, you're a coach, you run a training company, and your mission in life is to help educate girls in third world countries. What led you to that passion and vision?
Yeah, such a great question. I grew up in India till I was 11 and then moved to Australia. And it wasn't until I got into my 20s that I started to have some recurred memories. And when I went and seek some help, it became very evident that between the ages of 6 and 11, I had encountered repeated sexual abuse. And so as I got through the healing journey of that, and as I started to work through that, one of the great spiritual teachers that I also had in my life, we would often spend talking about, why do things happen? Things happen for a reason. And not that that abuse in any way was justifiable in any way. But what it got me thinking about was, what are the chances of that abuse stopped that I moved to Australia? Otherwise, perhaps it would still be continuing to this day. I don't know that. And how lucky am I to have come from a really educated family where my father, who's the youngest of 9 children, if you asked him today why he moved to Australia, he would say, for me. He would say, so that Shivani can have equal opportunities as a woman, so that she can study, she can marry who she wants, she can run her own business and do other things. And so I was very blessed to have, such an amazing force in my life. And I thought about how many of those girls, particularly in some of the rural villages where there isn't the education, where there is repeated, abuse, and also, I guess, the poorer that family is, the more likelihood is that she's married to somebody much, much older than her. And so that became a bit of a mission for that. So in the last 20 plus years in any of the businesses, we've given away part of our profits. I've sat on a number of not-for-profit boards around really looking at how we can do that. And my mission is, and I don't quite have all the answers today, Andreas, but it's very important to me that as I get older and as my kids get older and become more independent, that I would like to spend some more time looking at how to do that education piece for families, particularly because so much of the abuse happens in families, and really educate the kids, but also the families around how to look for signs of some of that abuse as well.
So you've changed tremendously as a person, and thank you for being vulnerable with your life story. How do you see yourself change as a leader? How did your leadership style change?
So many times. I mean, I think for me, some of the change, I believe, either comes from when you're really inspired for something. You go, wow, look at that leader, and I want to be more like them. And, I've had many examples of that. I know we've got the commonality of both being members in Entrepreneurs Organisation or EO, we know it. And, we come across some amazing leaders that are very inspiring. But the other times it's probably been really when I've been very challenged as a leader. When I haven't been able to scale a business, or I've had a lot of turnover in my business and I've lost some really key people. Or one of my businesses didn't work at all and I had to shut that down and I lost a lot of money in that particular business. So sometimes my leadership has really been challenged to go, well, the part that you've come up with isn't working and you need to come up with a different way of looking at things. So, I've tried to then read more or do more courses or talk to more people to try and understand what some of the gaps that I have as a leader and how I can fulfill some of those. And other times, as I said, I come across people and I go, wow, that is incredible. And I want to be able to copy and paste that, and I want to be able to learn that, and I want to be more of a leader like that.
So who's someone you look up to, and what do you admire in them?
Look, I just mentioned my dad. He's the first person that often comes to mind for me. I've just turned 52, Andreas, and ever since I was little, my first memory of having a conversation with him, he's always treated me as an adult. I can always sit down with my dad and say, hey, my relationship isn't working. My business isn't working. I'm not very happy about that. And about a year and a half ago, I was able to talk my parents into moving in the same city as me. And now they live about 300 meters away. And most days I get to see my dad. I had a walk with him this morning. It's evening, my time. So, for somebody that's constantly got unconditional love, constantly got, no judgment and stays in his adult, he doesn't, despite being my parent, he's never treated me as his child. He's treated me somebody that's his equal, and we're friends and we're having a conversation about it. And so there's some of the qualities I really admire in people, that irrespective of, in this case, he's got hierarchical power, especially when I was younger, that he's never exerted. And so he's always had that, let me try and really understand you and listen to you, and then let me know the bits of guidance that you need, and then I can talk about that. So that's pretty cool.
So you referenced hierarchical power, which is probably leading by authority. Did you make a conscious transition away from leading by authority in your business? And when was that? And what did you like? How do you lead today if not by authority?
I noticed that even before I stepped into entrepreneurship, even when I was in the corporate world, I got to the point where I had people that were pretty good that were working with me and for me, but I was not able to attract the people that I really wanted to come and work for me. And I remember missing out on a couple of those candidates and saying, ringing them and saying, hey, I know you've taken another job, but tell me, what was it about what was it about the interview or our job or our company that just didn't appeal to you? And they said, look, the job and the company was fine. And I remember a couple of them saying to me, I'm not sure if you would let me play in my own playground. And so whether I would give them room and space to grow, and whether they would perhaps have an opinion that clashed with me. And I was a fairly young leader then, in my sort of late 20s. And I remember thinking, and I had a really great coach and a mentor to run things by as well at the time, outside of my dad. So I had some people that were professionally helping me in that area. And that was a blind spot that I had. I came across as somebody that wanted to hire really smart people, but there was an element of me that really wanted to control them, and they had to do things my way. And I didn't realize that myself, but when I did, I thought, wow, this is very interesting, and what a blind spot. So how am I going to overcome that? How am I going to actually, because I want to find people that are smarter than me, but how am I going to park my ego? How am I going to actually allow the people that are smarter than me, that everybody's going to know are smarter than me, that are going to be reporting to me, and allow them to play in the area that I'm asking them to create and do things in? And that was a that was a pretty transformational moment for me.
How do you describe yourself? Actually, even better, how do others describe you as a leader? How would you say?
I hope that the words that people use, and I'm thinking about my children and my husband and being a leader in home as well as a leader outside. And I always believe that you can't be one without the other.
Mhm.
Very rarely do I come across people that are great at work and not great at home or vice versa. I think great leaders are just great leaders. I hope they would use words like, she's open and she has an open heart and an open mind. She's a great learner. She's kind, but she's got some pretty strong boundaries at the same time. So if you cross some boundaries, you will know about it. We will have some tough conversations around it. I will be very clear about what those boundaries are, whether it's with my children or an employee. So I hope that people would say that she's not always the easiest person that I've worked with or for or lived in a family with, but it's pretty clear about who she is. There's an authenticity about it, and I know where I stand. That's what I would hope that they would say.
So I'd love to dig into the tough conversations bit. But before that, you rose a very interesting point that you can't be a good leader at work and a bad leader at home or vice versa. What's your observation about people being conscious about, leadership at home and leadership at work? Are people transitioning from one to the other? Can you be trained to be a good leader at home or a good leader at work? What's your perspective?
Yeah, you ask great questions. I think there's this notion of, are leaders made, or are they born? And some people, have that ability and they've got those leadership qualities. But most of leadership, I believe, can be learned. You can train yourself, you can discipline yourself, you can practice it over and over again. And so to me, when people say, I feel myself at work, I'm a great leader at work, but I'm not a great leader at home. My question that always goes through is, well, which is the real you? Like, are you the
Such
real
a
you
great
at work
question.
or are you the real you at home, right? Or vice versa. I feel, I don't take any leadership at my home because I, spend all of that. Well, that's really interesting too. So, I believe, Andreas, that we carry masks and we all wear masks to protect ourselves. We wear masks to survive at times. They become habits, but to become really great leaders, we have to learn to take some of those masks off, both at home and in the workplace. And that's hard because then people see through us and they look into our souls and they go, maybe you're not that good at this particular thing. And that's a hard thing. I have lots of blind spots, and with 2 teenagers in the house, I can tell you that feedback is not even seeked, but I get constant feedback as a mum around my leadership at home. And I have to kind of go, rather than sort of argue back, or, they're not 3 and 4 anymore, they're 15 and 16. So I have to look at myself and go, I think there is some truth in that. There is some truth in that. And you're right. I think I am hard in that. So learning to have those tougher conversations and putting a mirror to yourself is probably where the growth is, but it's not easy. I know it's necessary to lead that authentic life, but I don't find that always very easy when my kids or my employees are showing that. I've had employees say, I said, look, we're really struggling to get great people. What is the bottleneck here? And I remember one of my managers saying to me, Shivani, the bottleneck is you. I know that you want, from a cultural perspective, to bring the right people in, but we are growing too fast. You need to just let us make those decisions. You need to trust us. And then I remember her going, I'm sorry if I've overstepped the mark. And initially I was really angry. I was like, how dare you, da, na, 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 na. And then I was like, oh my goodness, I'm the bottleneck right here. And I said, so let me digest that. That was pretty harsh feedback. I wasn't kind of ready for that. But you're right. And thank you for being courageous. I appreciate it. But and then when I got out of the way, the business started to scale better. We hired great people without me involved at all in the business, in that part of the business. So lots of learnings, in terms of being authentic and taking that feedback.
So many questions based on that. So, are you conscious of your values when you decide what is the authentic you? Like, how do you figure out who you are as a leader? so that you can bring your best self to work and no, you can shine?
I have a healthy sense of ego, and when my ego takes over, I find it difficult to see my value. Um, and somebody once described it to me. It was actually one of my meditation teachers, and they said, imagine your ego is like a dog, and imagine if it's a little chihuahua on a leash. And if you can control that dog, then you're walking the dog, you're running the
Mm-hmm.
show. And if it's a really giant dog and you have no control over it and literally you are running after the dog, then the dog is running you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I find it a lot easier to see my values when I'm really aware of my ego and I can manage it. And for me, being a meditator, when I'm doing my little rituals and my 10 every day and doing my
Mm-hmm.
meditation, I notice that I'm much more aware of my values. I'm much more aware of other people around me and their feelings and how to manage both. But different times I have not been aware and my ego's run the show and I have not behaved very well, whether it's again with my family or with employees or other places, and they've been pretty tough, embarrassing points. And I noticed that when my ego's running it, I am not connected to my values anymore because I'm no longer connected to myself, and my ego is just running the show.
Fascinating. It reminds me of this paradigm, the rider and the horse. So there's this EOer, Rick Sapio, who passed away recently. He was a great servant leader. One of the stories he mentioned is about the rider and the horse. And he said that in life you can choose to be the rider or the horse. And whatever you choose, life will become the other thing. So if you choose to become the horse, life becomes the rider and life will take you wherever it wants to. But if you choose to be the rider, then life becomes the horse and you can take it wherever you want to go. And and essentially designing your life and designing what kind of person you want to be and what kind of values you want to reflect and how do you want to carry these in your life and in your business and with your the people around you and your employees. So the art of self-awareness, I think, is paramount and a prerequisite for being a good leader and a conscious leader. So back to you. You mentioned about tough conversations, and I know that you also have a training company, and one of the training courses is about helping managers have tough conversations. So what is it that stops us from having tough conversations, and why is it important to have one?
Yeah, well, I mean, different texts and different philosophies talk about that we're either operating out of fear or we're operating out of love. And I think if you look at the role of the manager who's getting instructions from the executive and perhaps the board, and then they've got the people that are reporting to them. So often they're kind of that meat in the sandwich. They're kind of stuck in the middle, kind of being squished at both ends. And so when they're really fearful about the repercussions of raising a tough conversation, either being rejected or being yelled at or people disagreeing with them, a whole heap of fears, but essentially that's kind of the overall thing, then it becomes really difficult. And in my experience, most people avoid the tough conversations. Um, and people think that as a result of the tough conversations, sometimes those relationships may break. But people, as we know, Andreas, that that go to that trouble of having the tough conversations, they often become the parts that strengthen that relationship, because that means we can talk about tough things and we can move on. And so I felt that there was this a real need that even though we expect our managers to do that, and they have to have a lot of tough conversations, as I shared with you, sometimes with their the person that they report to. In that case, it was me, or for their other people. We need to really skill them. We need to train them and show them ways that they can manage those conversations and do that so that there might still be fear, but they can manage those fears and they've got some skills and methodologies that they can put into practice. So that was the reason that part was created, and as they do more of it, some of their fear subsides because they're going, okay, now I've got a bit of a hang of how I actually can have these conversations. So they learn that skill, and hopefully then they move out of that fear knowing that they'll be supported. And if they learn how to have those conversations with love, like we say to people in our families, we love you. And, people find it really strange to say in the workplaces, use the word love. And I think it's really important. I wrote a book called Tough Love for Leaders. I think we really need to, we might not tell people we love them, but we really need to come from that space of love. And so when we come from the space of love to have the tough conversations, it's a different energy, it's a different game. And people that are on the receiving end of it feel it a lot differently. And so really teaching managers to do that better, I think, and create really, really great workplaces.
And something else I know you teach people is to give regular, direct, and frequent feedback as opposed to waiting for the performance review at the end of the year or the 6 months. Why is that important? And how can people practice that?
I think feedback is one of the best ways to create an extraordinary culture. And when we get into the habits of doing it not once a year, not once a quarter, not once a month, when we just get into that habit of just giving that feedback, and there are some stats and research that talks about this 4-to-1 ratio, that if we can catch people doing something well, when they're doing something great, and we acknowledge them or we praise them in a 4-to-1 ratio, people are already set up when you want to give them that one piece of constructive feedback. So constantly giving people feedback, catching them doing something right, where people go, wow, like my colleague, my manager, my whoever sees me in terms of being able to do that is so important. I wrote this piece once, and I wrote about the book that I believe people are always looking for 3 things. They look for something to believe in, which is the vision. They look for someone to believe in, which is the leader. And then they're looking for someone to believe in them, which is their self-worth. And so I think feedback really, really encapsulates that last bit, which really where people are seen and they're acknowledged, as every human being has that need. I think it's such a great way to build culture up. And I see this constantly with teams and organizations that adopt that of giving regular feedback, that they do fast track their culture a lot more.
And what is the role of a manager as a coach in helping people feel safe and giving people the space and the direction to grow? And is that really practiced by managers today, or is it something that is missing?
The role of the manager is really tough because they wear so many hats. We think they wear this word manager hat, but at times they wear a trainer hat because they're training people. At times they wear a counselling hat because they're counselling people through a bit of a challenge. I believe that when we can train our managers to spend most of their time coaching, if they're counselling, great, step back into coaching. If they're training, great, step back into coaching. If they're managing, great, step back into the coaching. Because what we're then doing is we're creating people that are not dependent on us. We're creating people to become independent thinkers and doers and empowered enough to be able to do their roles really well. And so I think the role of the manager is challenging, but when they understand the different hats that they wear, identify perhaps what percentage of time that they're spending wearing those hats, and really then work out a way that they can spend most of their time, whether that's 70 or 80%, most of their time is wearing the coach hat. Again, frees the manager up, always not being that dependent person answering, problem solving all the time. So then we actually free that manager up to doing other things as well.
When was a moment in your life where you realized you made a leadership mistake as a manager or as a leader, where you realized that you had to change your ways?
So many times. So many times. One of the examples coming in is into my mind is in work, we've had a couple of really great people resign and leave to go elsewhere. And, again, if I can choose, my ego kicked in going, oh, well, great, good luck. I know that organization, it's not going to go that well. And, rather than really trying to understand through a better HR human resource process to do an exit interview, really understand what it is that we're not doing very well. And at the time, I certainly didn't have the data or the statistics to work out how expensive it is to actually, not only through the recruitment process, but to train somebody up to the level that this other person was or other people were that were pretty proficient in their roles, can be somewhere between 2 and 5 times their salary by the time we get them up to the same level. So that was pretty arrogant, and I realized that was a pretty big issue. And so I think when I looked at that, it wasn't just a people issue. It was the fact that my mind was a bit closed about not learning a new way. And so, the word that was introduced to me by somebody in EO was shoshin. And when I really looked into the word, it was open heart and open mind. So it wasn't just an open mind. It was when we approach things with an open heart and an open mind. And we know that if we just approach something with our head, it's not great. When we approach something just with the heart, it's not great. But when we can do both and connect the head and the heart, it's pretty powerful. And I wasn't using any of that in my leadership. It was very head-based and really making decisions better from the head and the heart, and now the gut, as we talk about it, and making sure that those things are aligned is certainly helping me, become a better leader.
What do you think female leaders are very good at, and what do they need to develop more? I'm overgeneralizing, but if we look at your experience in working with female leaders, what's your observation?
Yeah, such a great question. I know we're generalizing. So when I generalize, most female leaders I've come across are more empathetic. And in that empathy, maybe the percentage of head and heart, maybe there's a lot more heart. And sometimes that decision-making is, done there. So when I've come across, for example, a female manager, when we were talking about the example earlier, they've stayed much more time counseling somebody because of their empathic nature, rather than actually go, okay, so what are we going to now do? What do you want to do now? How can I help you? And really stepping back into that coaching part, which then brings you back into your head. The other thing that I've noticed female leaders do is that their communication, and again, I'm generalizing, tends to be better. And yes, you can take it back to women use more words, etc. But being a little bit more emotionally aware, generally, the communication is a lot more open. The open door policy type stuff works a little bit better. And I have seen some terrible female leaders, and I've seen some exceptional male leaders, and vice versa. And some of them through clients and some of them in my own teams. So it is a generalization, but I do see them communicating generally pretty well.
And do you resonate with this concept of male energy versus female energy and how the two need to be balanced? So you mentioned about having tough conversations. I consider that male energy, or you mentioned having intuition and empathy, which I consider female energy. How do you balance the two, and how have you observed that people balance those two?
Yeah, I was trained, as I started my career as an engineer, Andre, as we were talking about, I was trained not to show any of my feminine energy because that was weak and you were not going to be successful in a masculine world, in a male-dominated environment. So I remember for me, I shut that down for a long time. And that was the safe way. Stay in your masculine energy, keep being successful, keep producing. But I was out of whack. And I noticed this also with, perhaps people with male energy and people with female energy, that it's over one way. So, I believe that finding that balance, as I was talking about that tough love piece, we want to be tough, but we want to have love as well, is really important. Some people call it yin yang, some people call it qi. Some people call it prana. So, there's different cultures that have talked about different energies and masculine energies, but most of them talked about some balance. And I always think you've got to kind of, whether you want to use a scale out of 10, so for me, when I first started my career as an engineer, I was sitting at 9 or 10, 10 being really masculine energy and the other side of the scale perhaps being really feminine energy. And you kind of weigh depending on what the situation is. But I think if you're aware of where you are and you're also aware of what you need to bring in, it's really important, really important. I've got a son that's struggling a little bit through school at the moment. He's been through some bullying. And so bringing my masculine energy into him is not what's needed right now. What he really needs is this nurturing feminine energy that says, hey, I got you. And then the masculine energy kicks in that sits down with his school and says, you better do something about it. And by the way, here is some information and data. So knowing what you need to utilize and becoming aware of that is really powerful. And that took me a long time to get it. And I'm sure some days I completely miss it. But becoming aware of where I'm sitting, what do I need, but also what the other person needs, and which one do I need to put in to find that has been a lot of work, but very powerful when you actually become aware of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's an aha moment once you realize that these two energies exist, or they are part of you, and you can choose which energy to apply at which point.
Yeah. And, some people call that emotional intelligence. Some people call that energy work. Whatever you apply that, as long as the intention behind is that I'm going to bring that part of myself in to create that 1 + 1 is 3. So that if I bring that in, the outcome's going to be better than if I didn't bring that in.
I want to take you to your speaking vocation, and you are passionate about translating passion into discipline. I think you have a talk with a title along the lines of "Passion without discipline is pointless." And we talked in the pre-show about your ASK framework, how you turn passion into discipline. So I'd love to hear you tell us more about it.
Absolutely. I find a lot of people use the word passion. I see it everywhere. I see it on drink bottles. I see it on people's values. But a lot of people don't know how to translate it. And in fact, a lot of the global research talks about the fact that most of us are disconnected to this word passion. We don't know how to find it. So I felt going on that quest was really important. But passion is sometimes seen as this fleeting thing that comes from your heart. Oh, I desire that. I'm passionate about that. But passion without discipline becomes pointless. So that's where the discipline bit came in. So that, for example, if you're really passionate about your health, then you've got to be really disciplined about it. You've got to set up the cadence and the rhythms to be able to take care of that. If you're really passionate about your family, like really passionate about your family, then what are the actions that you've got in place? What is the discipline you've got in place? So the ASK framework was really to help people navigate their way through. The first one was I've created a model of 7 different passions, and you might call them different things, but essentially, for example, somebody says, oh, I really love traveling. I'm passionate about traveling. Do you travel for your soul? Do you travel because of your family? Do you travel because of your work? So when you get really clear about which part travel brings in for you, then what you want to do in your top 3 passions, which you consciously choose, is setting 10 goals that for each of those. And a lot of people that don't set goals, some people set goals, they hit them, they miss them. But when your goals are in alignment with your passions, when you set your passions first and then you set the goals underneath them, then the success rate goes up exponentially. And so becoming aware of them in that ASK model, the setting goals, the 10 goals around that, then creating vision boards if you're a visual person. And the K in ASK is really that knowing is time is finite. We've all had people in our life that we loved that have passed away or got very unwell. And so whether you want to look at weeks in the year, hours in the week, seconds in a day, whatever measure, just knowing that time is really finite and that you don't want to get to your deathbed with the passion still in you and having those regrets. So creating and carving out that discipline and time to live those, in a way that makes you feel like life is great. So, yeah, I just had the opportunity to do a TED Talk. I only had 12 minutes to do it, but I hope that message came across.
And what are the passions, your top 3 passions when it comes to Shivani?
My top 3 passions are work, family, and mind, in that order. And when I came across the first one, and it's not that I love my work more than my family, but as the first woman in my lineage to work and have that opportunity to work, I feel so privileged to be able to work. So if my family needs me, I'd be there, but I spend more time thinking, obsessing, looking at what I can do around my business, but also to educate those million girls around the world. Then it's my family, and then it's my mind and learning. And so I will make time each day to do some level of learning, whether it's reading books or doing other things. The other thing that also means is that when you get clear on your passions, you also get clear on what your passions are. So the trick is also to learn to say no a lot to the things that you're not that passionate about. For example, social is number 7 out of 7 on my hierarchy of passions. And as much as I'm social, if I've got an opportunity to spend time with my family or work or read a book, rather than go out with a bunch of friends that I might have seen a week ago, I will always choose the other 3, one of the other 3. So also learning to say no to things that are not in your passions has been really key.
Knowing that you read a lot and one of your passions is learning, what would you recommend that we read? Something that has
Wow.
resonated with you, perhaps relevant to leadership and workplace culture.
That is such a hard question to answer, Andres. Let me just take a couple of things which are very different. Spiritually, probably one of the best books I've read is You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay, because it really started to shift the way that I think and that I'm being. One of the books that I love that really started to shift my habits was Atomic Habits by James Clear. That really, really helped leadership. Leaders Eat Last, that talks about culture, and that really resonated with me, having my Indian background of treating our guests and people who are employees as mini gods, and then being able to eat last. And then I really love reading inspirational things. I don't read a lot of autobiographies, but books like Nelson Mandela's book really had a pretty profound impact on me, because I really started to think about, the significance and the opportunities I have compared to him and what he created in that space. So I could keep going, but I'll stop with those 3 or 4.
And Shivani, what do you think leaders have to be more conscious about? What would you whisper to the ear of a leader that was unaware of his leadership style or unaware of the culture he was building around him or her?
Yeah, absolutely. From my personal experience, the thing that really started to really shape that for me, not just in my leadership, but all aspects, was meditation. And I had avoided being a meditator. I was like, I don't really want to do that. Sometimes I literally meditate to be a better parent. Sometimes I meditate to be a better leader. Sometimes I meditate just to have some creativity and space. So that has been a really big game changer for me. And, I don't want to get you to get hung up on the word meditation. It's not about sitting on a mountaintop and doing ohms, right? It's more about becoming conscious, exactly the words, Andreas, that you just used. By doing that, or even if you're sitting there counting, breathing into 4 and breathing out to 4, that's meditation. You want to call it breathing, you want to become anything that you can do to become aware, whether you walk in silence or you run, or something that brings you into the awareness, and you start to look at yourself and how you interact with people from a third perspective, and have that consciousness about it. That has been the game changer. I call it meditation. Other people call it, swimming in the pool or in the ocean or running. So whatever form of that is for you, that gives you that awareness, that gives you that space, I think is more important than reading the books and doing 1,000 courses. I used to work in manufacturing when I first started, work as an engineer, and they did in this Japanese factory for they did a bit of a competition to see who could design the best safety. And so people, created safety rails. Some people did better steps. Some people worked out how they could point things out so people wouldn't trip over and injure themselves. And the person that won created a 1 meter by 1 meter Japanese garden in the middle of the factory floor. And they said, if we can just have time to think about how we're injuring people, how some people don't go home because they died, that awareness is going to be much more important than the other thing. Now, that was over 20 years ago. I've never forgotten that, because it really got me starting to think about the fact that I needed to be more aware. I needed time to be and reflect and think about what was happening rather than doing more, kind of doing less and becoming more aware, if that makes sense.
And Shivani, where can people find out more about you and follow your work?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of places. The main one is passioninstitute.global, which is our training company, and my personal speaking and authoring is shivani.com. So one of those, and LinkedIn also.
Shivani, thank you for your humility, for your vulnerability, for your hard-learned lessons of life. I've learned a lot from our discussion. To everyone listening, thank you for giving us your undivided attention in these 40 or so minutes. If you liked the show as much as I did enjoying and learning from Shivani, please give us a 5-star rating, because that's how more people get to find out about the podcast and spread the word. And if you want to watch us and not just listen to us, you can always go to YouTube. And if you want to learn more about creating high-performance culture, you can always go to rethinkculture.co. And with all of that, thank you again for listening, and keep leading a life at work and at family, like we said today here with Shivani, where you can inspire others to be better versions of themselves.